Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Peru President Boluarte talks trade boost after meeting China's Xi. Biden vows not to decouple from China while deepening Indo-Pacific ties. Joe Biden gives up trying to pronounce tech company's name, latest gaffe. Panda diplomacy might not be dead just yet. A tentative reset between Washington and Beijing. Peru President Boluarte talks trade boost after meeting China's Xi. Reuters. Peruvian President Dina Boluarte met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday to discuss major infrastructure projects and potential investments. The two leaders discussed the Belt and Road Initiative, China's project to connect the country with the rest of the world. Boluarte mentioned that a megaport project in Chancay, funded by China, will be inaugurated in 2024 and will greatly benefit trade and Chinese investments. Peru is set to host the annual meeting of APEC country leaders in November, and Boluarte invited Xi to attend. Biden vows not to decouple from China while deepening Indo-Pacific ties. Nikkei Asia. U.S. President Joe Biden stated that the U.S. is not decoupling from China but is instead diversifying its economic relations with the country. Biden made the remarks at the APEC CEO summit following a 4-hour summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two leaders agreed to resume military communication, establish a dialogue on artificial intelligence, and cooperate on anti-drug efforts. Biden also emphasized the importance of stable relations between the two largest economies in the world, stating that it is beneficial for everyone. Prior to Biden's speech, 14 partners of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity signed a supply chain agreement, signaling progress in trade cooperation. Joe Biden gives up trying to pronounce tech company's name, latest gaffe. Telegraph. During a speech at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, U.S. President Joe Biden stumbled over the pronunciation of a tech company's name. He admitted defeat and said, "It's better to not try." Biden, who had a speech impediment as a child, has become known for trip-ups and gaffes in his speeches. In his address, he also addressed the recent inflation figures in the U.S., saying there is a disconnect between the numbers and how people feel about their place in the world. Biden also discussed the U.S.'s relationship with China, saying it is not all kumbaya and highlighting economic and national security concerns. Panda diplomacy might not be dead just yet. New York Times. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has said that China is ready to continue cooperation with the U.S. on panda conservation and may send pandas back to U.S. zoos. The statement comes after 2 pandas and their cub were recently returned to China from the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington. She referred to the pandas as envoys of friendship between the Chinese and American people. A tentative reset between Washington and Beijing. Financial Times. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden made progress toward stabilizing relations between the two countries during their recent meeting in San Francisco. The talks resulted in key agreements, including China's commitment to reopen military-to-military communications channels and curb the export of chemicals used to make fentanyl. Efforts were also made to reduce tensions over Taiwan, with Xi stating that there were no plans for military action to reunify the island with mainland China. Stabilization with China is increasingly desirable for the U.S. as it grapples with conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, and China is seeking to court foreign businesses as it faces economic challenges at home. While relations are not expected to improve overnight, both sides have compelling reasons to manage their relationship despite their strategic rivalry. Is Biden tired of winning? He might be after summit with Xi. The Independent. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping have reached agreements on 2 key issues during their face-to-face meeting at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference. The first agreement involves curbing the trafficking of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, from China to the U.S. Most precursor chemicals needed to produce fentanyl come from China, which are then shipped to Mexico for use by drug cartels. The final product is smuggled into the U.S. President Biden pressed President Xi on this issue, stating that fentanyl is one of the worst drug problems the U.S. has ever faced. Xi agreed to take action with a plan devised by American and Chinese negotiators, including going after specific companies that make precursors for fentanyl. The second agreement involves the resumption of communication between the U.S. and Chinese militaries. This communication had been suspended after Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan and amid other tensions between the two countries. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and other military officials will now engage in regular talks with their Chinese counterparts. This will help establish a degree of trust and provide a mechanism to defuse potentially dangerous situations. The U.S.-China hotline rings again. Foreign policy. During President Joe Biden's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, both sides agreed to restart military-to-military talks. This agreement is seen as an important and tangible outcome of the meeting, as it allows for direct communication between US and Chinese military officials and reduces the risk of miscalculations or accidents escalating into a crisis. However, US officials have warned that China is engaging in dangerous behavior in the Indo-Pacific, such as buzzing American jets and ships and penetrating Taiwan's air defense identification zone. The United States has also called for more hotlines with China, but it remains unclear who would answer these calls as China has not named a successor to Defense Minister Li Shangfu, who was removed from his position in October. In other news, Finland is closing 4 of its border crossings with Russia due to a rise in asylum applications, which Finnish President Sauli Niinistö believes is an act of revenge from Russia for Finland's closer defense relationship with the United States. Additionally, the Turkish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee has postponed debate on Sweden's NATO bid, citing insufficient progress in negotiations and concerns about Sweden's relationship with Kurdish groups. She is desperate for U.S. capital amid a slowdown, Rahm Emanuel says. Bloomberg. Rahm Emanuel, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, has claimed that Chinese President Xi Jinping is desperate for American investment due to economic and political mistakes that have prompted capital flight from China. Emanuel's remarks came after she met with U.S. President Joe Biden and called on American executives to invest more in China. Emanuel also criticized Xi for skipping a reception of Asia-Pacific leaders in San Francisco in favor of a dinner with U.S. CEOs, calling it a telling sign of China's vulnerabilities. Emanuel has been one of the Biden administration's most vocal critics of China. Biden and Xi try the personal touch. Foreign policy. U.S. President Joe Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in San Francisco this week on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) summit. The meeting aimed to test whether presidential diplomacy can lead to major breakthroughs between the U.S. and China to prevent the emerging new Cold War. While many lauded Biden's efforts to dial down tensions with China, experts warn that this is just one step in a long road to finding a floor in the U.S.-China relationship. They also note that there are numerous systemic issues in the relationship that some see as insurmountable. The meeting between Biden and Xi has put to the test whether presidential diplomacy can lead to major breakthroughs between the U.S. and China. The aim of the meeting was to test whether personal rapport between world leaders can pave the way for better relations and avoid the risk of conflict between the two superpowers. While many experts and officials praised Biden's efforts to dial down tensions, they also noted that there are numerous systemic issues that could derail progress and that personal diplomacy alone is not enough to mend U.S.-China ties. Biden says U.S. not looking to decouple economic ties with China. The Independent. President Joe Biden has stated that the U.S. will not attempt to sever economic ties with China, despite having real differences with the country. While the Biden administration has tightened some export controls on dual-use technologies and increased efforts to regulate emerging technologies, Biden emphasized that the U.S. is de-risking and diversifying its economic relations with China, rather than decoupling. He stated that the U.S. will continue to address differences with China through smart policies and strong diplomacy, while also protecting national security interests. Biden described his recent meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping as candid and constructive and emphasized the importance of working together on global issues such as climate change and counter-narcotics. The leaders also agreed to resume communication between their countries' defense departments and announced an agreement for China to crack down on the manufacturing and trade of precursor chemicals used in the production of fentanyl. Well, folks, it seems like the US and China are making some progress in their relationship, or at least they're trying to. President Biden and President Xi Jinping recently met at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, and while there were some stumbling moments, they managed to reach some agreements. First off, they agreed to restart military-to-military talks, which is a big deal. It's always good to have direct communication between military officials to avoid any misunderstandings or accidents. They also discussed curbing the trafficking of fentanyl from China to the US, which is a significant problem. Most of the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from China, so cracking down on that trade is a step in the right direction. But let's not forget the lighter side of things. During his speech at the summit, President Biden had a little fun with his pronunciation skills, or lack thereof. He stumbled over the name of a tech company and eventually gave up, admitting that it's better not to try. Hey, we all have our moments, right? In other news, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has expressed his willingness to continue cooperation with the U.S. on panda conservation. Yes, you heard me right, panda conservation. It seems like panda diplomacy might not be dead just yet. Who knew those cuddly creatures could play such a role in international relations? Now, let's get back to the serious stuff. Both leaders emphasized the importance of stable relations between the two largest economies in the world. They're aware of the economic and national security concerns, and they understand that managing their relationship is in their best interest, despite their strategic rivalry. So, what do you think about all this? Are you surprised by the progress made between the US and China? Do you think panda diplomacy is a good idea? Let me know your thoughts, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.